Ruth, are you okay for us to begin?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you, Sarah.
Perfect. And I can see the recording has started. Fantastic. Okay, good morning. Machtenbar agus Falcha. Welcome everybody to all our board members and members of the public and the press who are joining us for this online meeting of the NHS Highland board today. I can see we've got lots of people joining. Good morning, everybody. I can see people coming in there. Lovely. So as you can see, the meeting is being recorded. That's so that we can upload that onto the website for other people to watch back at their leisure. If people want to contribute to the meeting today, just a reminder to everybody, we don't use the chat function in this meeting. So if you want to come in with a question or a comment, board members, if you could use your hands up facility. And if I could ask everybody to stay on mute when you're not contributing, just to help reduce the background noise. It's lovely if people can keep their cameras on and we can see faces. But obviously, if you're having trouble with your connectivity, then switching your camera off is sometimes a good way to stay in the call. We've got a few changes to note today. So before we get into the business, I would just like to note some of those changes. So first of all, as some of you might have heard a minute ago, we're saying a big thank you and farewell to Gaynor Roger. This is Gaynor's last board meeting. So for those of you who don't know, Gaynor has been a non-exec with the board since October 2016. So her full term comes to an end at the end of this month. I'm sure it's whizzed by though, Gaynor, just in a flash. Gaynor's done a lot of, fulfilled a lot of important roles and made a significant contribution to the board. You did a clinical governance audit committee, the IJB and Argyll and Bute, endowments, pharmacy practices, and a number of those were in a chair role as well, so chair and clinical governance committee for I think almost 6 years, and then moving to chair audit committee more recently. Gaynor's also held a number of what we call champion roles. So Gaynor has been our anti-fraud champion and also our environment and sustainability champion in recent years. So a massive thank you, Gaynor, for your dedication and hard work. We'll miss you and we wish you all the best in your future endeavours. I'm sure we'll see you around other tables in the Highland area frequently. I'd also like to extend congratulations to Lorraine Cowie, who is our Head of Strategy and Transformation. This is also Lorraine's last meeting. Lorraine is taking up a new role as the professional lead in sustainable services within the Scottish Government. So they've recognised the talent that we had on the board and they've nabbed it. So Lorraine, as many of you will know, Lorraine's work with us over the last few years has been outstanding. Lorraine, you led us through the design and delivery of our Together We Care strategy. You took us through your transformation work and delivery plans since the pandemic, and been really kind of central, the linchpin to delivering our integrated performance and quality report, which we now consider at all of our committees and our board meetings as well. So a huge thank you to Lorraine for your hard work within the board, and we wish you all the very best. And again, we'll probably see you around some different tables in your new role. And more congratulations. It's a good month. So congratulations to Evan Bezic, who has been appointed to the role of Chief Officer for our Argyll and Bute Health and Social Care Partnership. So Evan has been doing the role on an interim basis since April this year. And before that was our head of head of service for primary care in Argyll and Bute. So Evan is not new to the Argyll and Bute partnership, but it's wonderful to welcome him into the role substantively. And Evan brings with him 13 years of experience in operational and strategic management. So we're really delighted that he's been appointed into that post, and we look forward to continuing to work with Evan really closely in the future. And just a kind of a nod to an item that we've got later on the agenda, you'll see that we have got the British Sign Language Plan at item 11, and we'll have, she's probably not here yet, but we'll be joined at that point by Verity Giles, who is a British Sign Language interpreter, who will be signing for that item of the business. And we'll get to that later, but you can see that is a joint report with the Highland Council, and that was presented at their Community and Place Committee just very recently. And I know Fiona touches on this in her Chief Chief Executive report as well, but just to let everybody know that we'll be having our annual review on Tuesday, the 19th of November. So that's an important date for us. This year we're moving it around a little bit because we don't have to do everything in Inverness. So we're going to have it in the council chamber at Kilmorey in Lochgilphead, and that'll start at 1 p.m. And we'll publish further details of that on our website in due course. It is a public meeting, and of course members of the public are welcome to be a part of that. And will be that will be either kind of in person, or people can join that online as well. And it's a really good opportunity for members of the public to hear what we've been up to and what our priorities are for the future. So we look forward to receiving any questions, and people can of course submit those either during the event or beforehand, so that we can pick those up in our presentations. So that was a bit of a ramble at the beginning, but lots happening, as you can tell. So I'll move now on to the agenda, and I'll first check, Ruth, do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, we do. We have apologies this morning from Bert Donald, from Emily Austin, and from Katrina Sinclair.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. Next, could I ask anybody if they have any declarations of interest? Alistair, please.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I had considered making a declaration of interest in my capacity as a Highland councillor, but after examining my connection to the items on the agenda and applying the objective test, I feel I don't need to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair. And Steve, please.
Morning, everyone. Morning, Chair. Yeah, thanks. Similar to Alistair, I consider making a declaration in my capacity as an employee of High Life Highland, but I've applied the test against the agenda, and I don't think it's required. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you both. Okay, I'm not seeing any other declarations, so we can move on now to item 1.3. This is the minute of our previous meeting, so that was held on the 30th of July, and the associated action plan. So we're being asked to approve the minute, but I'll just pause if anybody has any matters of accuracy that we need to pick up before we approve those. No, okay, so I'm assuming members are content that that was an accurate record of the meeting. We can approve those. And then we have our action plan, which I'm just going to open on my other screen here. We can see here we've got 3 items proposed to close and 1 that's in progress, but I'm just going to hand over. Ruth, do you want to just give us a bit of information, particularly about the one that is still in progress, please?
Thank you. Yes, Sarah. Yes, the one that's still in progress is Action 26, and that's referring to the board's assurance through the IPQR at both your governance committees and the board meetings. So we have a board session planned in October when we will be meeting with colleagues from NES, and they will be doing further work with the board on this particular subject. So for the time being, that particular action is still classed as being progressed, and we will take stock on it after that October session and amend the action plan accordingly. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Ruth. So yeah, so if people are happy with that, given we'll pick that up in October, we can change that due date to after that October session. So we've got a chance to have a good think about it. And we've got some others there for closure. Fairly straightforward, but I'm happy if anybody's got any questions or any issues. We can pick those up just now. No, I'm not seeing any hands up. So members, we're content to close those 3 that are with the grey boxes and update the due date of the development session. That one. Okay, great, lovely. Item 1.4. Any matters arising that don't appear elsewhere in the agenda that any members wish to raise? Okay, super. That moves us on then to item number 2. So I'd like to invite Fiona to give us her Chief Executive's report, please. Over to you, Fiona.
Many thanks, Sarah, and good morning to everybody joining on the call today. So the main focus of activity since my last report has been the national mission to reduce delayed discharges so that we can deliver right care in the right place. This is not a new area of work, but in recent weeks we have strengthened and intensified our work on system capacity ensuring that the availability of resources and places can be seen right across from acute hospitals, community hospitals, care homes and care at home, and ensuring that connecting those parts between services is as person-centred and efficient as possible. I should note, however, that since my report was written, we have been informed that HC1, one of our independent sector partners within social care, have announced the closure of Moss Park Nursing Home in Fort William. NHS Highland and the Highland Council are working to find a solution to support the delivery of high quality and sustainable care in the area, and that is ongoing as yet without conclusion. We acknowledge the concern from the community about this announcement, and we will have senior leaders attending the community meeting about this matter this evening. It does once again highlight the setbacks that are experienced in Highland in meeting the needs of people in care settings, which can lead to people losing independence as they stay in inappropriate acute settings, as well as putting pressure on our hospitals. This agenda will also be covered, this item, will be covered in more detail in an agenda item later around the 90-day action plan for delayed discharges. So the capacity work we're engaged in is also looking to build technological solutions like the discharge app that's been developed to support communication between our hospital and community teams. In my report, I've referenced a recent board chief executive meeting where I was shown robot technology that can assist healthcare and healthcare settings, from the humanoid to the cleaning robot. And we were challenged as a group as to what more the NHS could do to support Scottish and UK entrepreneurship and engineering startups. Also within my report, I wanted to draw out the trauma-informed conference that I had the pleasure of co-opening with Derek Brown, the Chief Executive at Highland Council. The increased focus on understanding the access barriers that are experienced by people who've had trauma within health and social care is powerful. And I think there's much more that we can do to build this approach into our practice throughout the board. The conference offered tangible ways that this has happened and that could be applied to other teams and services. As you'll also see in my report, my visits have continued throughout the summer across Argyll and Bute and Highland, and I've enjoyed hearing directly from our practitioners and from our staff about their daily experiences, whether they're things that challenge me to think more about what as system leaders we need to do to support our staff, or to hear feedback about things where people feel that there has been areas of improvement and that we're strengthening our responses. I'd also like to draw your attention in my report to the upcoming Speak Up Week that starts on the 30th of September 2024 and continues the work that now has been underway for many years in the board, and encouraging staff to come forward and to talk about experiences where they're needing more support or needing intervention, where they feel things are of concern. And a number of events will be held right across the board area, encouraging staff to be confident about doing so and to be clear what routes are available for them to do so. I'd also draw your attention to the winners of our Values in Practice Awards, who are listed in my report, and my congratulation goes to all of those winners and those that were shortlisted. We're seeing increasing numbers of nominations coming forward, which is wonderful that colleagues are recognising what's happening in teams and services and wanting to put people forward for the encouragement and recognition of their work. And finally, Sarah's already slightly stolen my thunder, but I was going to draw your attention to our annual review on the 19th of November in Loch Gilphead. And as Sarah says, that's a really essential opportunity for us to reflect on the year that's passed and to look forward to the year ahead. And I look forward to seeing as many of you as possible at that event. But I'll pause there and I'm happy to take any questions on the content of my report. Thank you. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Fiona. And just I'd like to invite members in for comment and question, but just before others come in, I just wanted to pick up a few points. So I've had the pleasure of accompanying Fiona on some of the visits, and I'd really like to commend you on keeping up that effort. I know it takes a lot of organisation and time and coordination, but I recognise how valuable that is, and I've seen that when I've been out with you firsthand, not only how important it is for our staff and our partners and our contractors to feel visible and valued when we visit them, and have that opportunity to speak face to face with the chief executive and the chair is a really good opportunity, but the learning that we get from it is so valuable as well. And so I just wanted to say that it's fantastic that we've sustained that effort, particularly when everything else feels very, very challenging. And just to pick up your points there, Fiona, about the digital and innovation, so that message has been echoed to chairs. We recently had a national chairs get together, and we had a presentation from Tom Steele, who's my counterpart in Scottish Ambulance Service, but he also co-chairs the Scottish Government's Innovation group. I've got that name wrong, obviously, but and we saw a very compelling presentation about the use of AI, and even in things like, very standardized letter generation, and taking the real menial tasks out of people's jobs so that they have the opportunity to use their skills for the really important stuff and for what they trained for. So that was very, very compelling, and I agree with your sentiment, Fiona. We should embrace it. Okay, any comments or questions or anything there for Fiona? Okay, Anne, please.
Well, just to carry on from your own comments there, Sarah, it is referenced in the Clinical Governance Committee minutes, but I attended that meeting, and we had a very excellent presentation from our research and development team at that meeting. And I think that it was a reminder of the breadth of work that is going on within the organisation. I'm sure we can do more, but I think it would be useful if there's space, to showcase some of the work that team undertakes with colleagues, obviously, across the organisation at our annual review, or in some of the documentation produced for the annual review. Just to add to that, I just wondered, Fiona, whether you have had, since you came into post, an opportunity to meet with colleagues at UHI and HIE, whom we've had good relationships with, in the past. We've previously discussed lots of different innovation opportunities and on spin-off opportunities with them, I'm sure. I'm also wondering, I don't think there's anybody present today. I've had a look at the people list, and I don't think there was anyone present at the last board meeting, but we have in the past benefited from attendance from somebody from UHI at the board meeting as a demonstration of our commitment to that innovative approach, and also obviously the education side of things, which is very important for us as a board. So I just wondered if you'd had an opportunity to discuss with them how we might continue that collaboration going forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Anne. I've met with colleagues from UHI and HIE in a number of fora, but I haven't had a dedicated meeting about innovation. So I think that's a great prompt to try and refresh conversations maybe that have dropped between a change of leadership. I'll pick that up because I suppose what I was fortunate to open our innovation conference that was held at Eden Court some months ago, and that was a great demonstrator of work that's going on. The challenge that was put to us in the board chief executive meeting is that in simple terms, that the point that the NHS are willing to take on innovation is when the risk has already been carried by the startup or the entrepreneur for some time, and whether the NHS or indeed other public bodies could move into sharing that risk of development phase rather than waiting for it to be developed and then bring it in through a research phase. So, you know, I think this is all interesting things. I think the way that we're doing things, we have to test everything at the moment. We can't rely on the status quo. So I'll pick up that action and link with colleagues and then can bring an update to a later board meeting. But thanks for the prompt.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands up, so we're being asked to note Fiona's update. Thank you, Fiona. Okay, I'm now going to come round to the chairs of my committees to give us an update, and we can see in our pack we have the minutes from the various meetings. So first up, Alex, I've got 2 sets of minutes for FRP, so we've got the one on the 9th of August and the 6th of September. But Alex, I'll invite you to give us your highlights.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chair, and morning, folks. Yeah, we had 2 very good meetings. The financial position was discussed at length, and Heather will give us an update on that, where we are. But the challenges that are coming through, and quite clearly are the forecasting of savings. And what was discussed, I think, and it's a fair point, is that we'll get a much better handle it in Q2 rather than where we are now, which was early on. The other problem, or the other discussion we had, was on adult social care in financial projections. And again, a Q2 forecast there will be better. So we're looking ahead a little bit and waiting to see the numbers that we're getting there. In terms of the capital asset management updates, one of the things that's concerning us and has continued to concern us is that when the capital funding was reduced last year, one of the promises that was made was that we'll get more money for backlog maintenance. Now, that hasn't happened yet, and discussions are ongoing with the Scottish Government to see where we are, but we're about 50% of what we're expecting to get. So again, the Director of Estates is continuing, and got a monthly meeting with the capital people in the Scottish Government to see how we improve there, and we'll keep an eye on that and see how we progress as we move forward. The IPQR was another thing that was discussed, and one of the concerns we have, and again we'll discuss it again today, is that the red, amber and green, the RAG way of looking at it, is a very blunt tool, and it isn't actually giving us a true reflection of what we've got there, because when we look at it, you don't see any green at all. All you're seeing is amber and red. So that's something that we need to look at, and part and parcel, I think, of the discussion we'll have in the development day. But one of the things that we're looking at in terms of the FRP is to focus on 2, 3, 4 items within the IPQR where there is a priority, and we'll dig deeper into those to see where we can get a better understanding as to why there's a problem or how we're going to get around the problem, etc. The last bit to discuss, and again we'll take it in the board later on, is the Highland Charter to Climate, Nature and Health. We had a good discussion on that. We think, to be honest, it's a no-brainer as far as we were concerned. So we're quite happy to endorse that report going forward to the board. That's me. Any questions?
That's great, thanks, Alex. And I suppose just to touch on that point, I was at that FRP when we were looking at the data. I think you're right. I think the RAG, you know, has its place, but I think for where we are currently as an organisation, it, as you've said, it is a blunt tool, and it can be tempting to oversimplify. But I think the discussion that we had at FRP that time really reflected that in being so, I was going to say black and white, red or green, about it all, we're missing some of that nuance. And whilst there are definitely areas where we absolutely need to improve, what we haven't been doing quite so well is recognising the good practice and the excellent service that our staff are providing most of the time. So that was a really, really good conversation, and you're right, I'm keen that we pick that up in the development session we have in October and tease that out a bit more. I suspect we'll never get it exactly right because there's so much data and so many services that we provide. It's very complex, but I think it's right that we challenge ourselves to understand if the way that we're looking at the data tells us what we really need to understand. David, I'll bring you in, please.
Just very briefly, we have taken that on board and made some amendments to the board paper later when we come to IPQR, but I'll keep my powder dry for that later. Thanks.
Yeah, no spoilers, David. Let's, we need to keep that excitement for the IPQR. Great. Okay, any questions for Alex for the FRP minutes? No. Okay, great. So I'm going to invite Anne to speak next. So this we're looking at the minutes of the Staff Governance Committee that was held on the 3rd of September. So over to you, Anne.
Thanks, Sarah. Well, I'll continue on a similar theme and just draw people's attention to the new presentation of the staff governance metrics, which we received for the first time at this committee meeting, and also is included in the IPQR for today. This is obviously the first iteration of the more granular data at directorate level, so it may well need to be refined as we go on, and we are going to discuss this in a development session in October. A key aim of presenting the data for each directorate is to enable the committee to engage the wider executive team, not just the Director of People and Culture, in identifying good practice as well as where improvement support needs to be targeted within the organisation. I think that Elspeth also raised a key point in that discussion about the role of our local partnership forums in discussing the more detailed data that is available to all teams through our dashboards, both to celebrate success, but also to try and find solutions where there are continued barriers to improvement on these metrics. Good to see this new development taking place, and we're looking forward as a committee to using the data going forward. We received moderate assurance on a number of matters. 2 of the substantive reports are also on the agenda today. We considered in some detail issues around whistleblowing cases arising from long-standing difficulties in sustaining service provision, including how the public interest test should be applied in these cases when risks and mitigating actions have already been agreed. So that was obviously prompted by the Q1 report, and that was a very interesting and worthwhile discussion with a range of views being expressed. So it'll be interesting to see how the board receives that today. However, given the importance of the organisation being seen to take action in relation to staff voicing their concerns, we did take good assurance that there is now an agreement that a 6-monthly review of agreed action plans arising from cases can be undertaken within the whistleblowing process, in addition to any other governance route that might have been agreed. We also considered the first quarterly report on the Health and Care Staffing Act, which is the other item on your agenda today. And a number of issues were raised by committee members who recognised, I think, that this is very much the start of a journey, and that the approach is one of steady improvement rather than being expected to have full implementation from day one. So again, this is the first presentation of assurance on this issue, and I'm sure that Gareth will welcome any feedback that members have on the format of the report, because I'm sure that will develop over time. And then finally, we received assurance on the current communications and engagement strategy implementation. As always, we were impressed by what is achieved by this small team, and we particularly welcomed the emphasis on evaluation of our campaigns. I would like to alert the board, if you haven't noticed already, that a couple of important items have been paused because of national issues, including development of the organisation's intranet, which is clearly crucial in terms of our ambitions on staff engagement and communication. However, we did receive assurance that the head of eHealth is working with colleagues to find a solution to that, and hopefully that work might be able to move forward in the future. So those were the key items from the committee, and happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Anne. There was one piece that I wanted to pick up, and we can either do it now or we could do it in the IPQR, but I was interested in the comments around the time to fill metric and understanding the root causes. And I don't know if Gareth might be able to pick this up. And I see that we're doing some initial investigations to understand the challenges around the volume, and we might not have an answer to that yet, but I suppose it would be interesting to get that, because it's contrasting, isn't it, to what we know about there being a lack of workforce. So wanted to see if we could tease that out a bit. But Gareth, I'll bring you in. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Although there's been some improvement, we'll probably touch on that in the IPQR. It's not to the extent we'd like to see. We are making sure we don't continue to just try the same things, which was to look at focusing on managers following the procedures and as being as efficient and effective as possible, because we felt that's where some of the delays were, but also making sure the recruitment team was supporting that, and it's obviously not having quite the impact we expected. So digging into that a bit more, and this is both through intelligence we hold within the recruitment team, the workforce monitoring report, which showed an increase in applications from people with the protected characteristic race background of African other, significantly 6 times the rate of the majority white groups within the UK, which correlates with feedback we're getting from a significantly increased number of applications from abroad. So this is backed up by going out on visits and speaking to people, which I've done over the last few months, speaking to managers, basically being overwhelmed with very, very high numbers of applications at shortlisting stage. So 200, possibly 300 applications for a single post. And many of those originating from overseas, which isn't necessarily an issue in its own right. It's that many of them don't have a right, when you drill into it, don't have a right to work. So in the UK. So there's a lot of not applicable applications, if you like, coming through the system. All boards are experiencing this, from what I understand with conversations with colleagues. Being online and going to an online universal platform has enabled that, which is a positive, but it also demonstrates some of the unintended consequences of going to these systems, which make it very easy to submit multiple applications. So that's definitely one area we know is a challenge. And some of the things we're looking at, which could link into the conversation we just had around digitization, are the digital solutions. So one of them is that at the moment there's a tick box that says right to work, and you tick it, and there's nothing else really more than that. But there is technology and there are services out there that can look at verification of right to work. So that might be something we'll be able to build into the workflow. However, as with all things, there is a degree of dependence on what can be, I suppose, progressed at a national level, because it's a national system. So there's certainly some more road. We've opened up the conversations, and many of us are familiar with using ID verification in other platforms. It's used quite widely in councils to verify that applications to their systems. So some potential opportunities. There isn't a ready-made solution on the shelf at the moment to pick off, and we want to focus on that. Beyond that, we'll be looking at how can we support managers to do the long listing, if you like, and that again, that's quite resource intensive, and it will require somebody to do that. So that's one of the big challenges. And similarly, we are also looking at other areas which we know are generally within the pre-employment check stage, when we've got preferred candidates, and we know that there can be delays that creep in and that, but we have had assurance that our occupational health checks are running through 90-something, I think about 93% of them within the target of 3 days being processed. So we know that's not a significant contributor to delays. Disclosure Scotland has a very high compliance with its target of seven-day turnaround as well. So references is the other area where we know that is a bit of a challenge for a number of different reasons. Very often with those that are from backgrounds who've maybe worked in, for want of a better word, the gig economy. So 0 hours contracts, multiple contracts over a number of years. So that is problematic. And one of the things we're looking at a national level is whether we actually need to revise our approach to references, because at the moment you require at least 2 references covering the last 2 years of employment. So that's, for some people, that's challenging. So that's just to give you a flavour of, we are absolutely looking at this in quite a lot of depth. There are no necessarily straightforward answers, but we are, I suppose, taking the approach that don't keep doing the same thing and expecting different results. We're looking at how we can explore doing different things differently.
Thanks, Gareth. That's really helpful to understand that, actually. So it's I hadn't appreciated the complexity there. So that's really helpful to understand, and good to hear that we're looking at lots of different things. And you stole my. I was gonna have a smart idea and suggest AI for weeding out people, but glad to hear that that's being considered, and potentially some kind of national approach if everybody's experiencing it. That's good. Okay, that was helpful. Any other questions or comments with regards to the staff governance update? No, okay, thank you. And next I have, I'll invite Jerry to speak. So we've got the minutes of the Highland Health and Social Care Committee, which was held on the 4th of September. So Jerry, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and morning everyone. We had, as usual, a very full agenda of our meeting on the 4th of September, and as always, my thanks to colleagues for their perseverance in ploughing through all the papers and their contributions. So following on a theme that Alex has picked up there, we had a look at the financial position of the partnership, and I think for what, just building on what Alex has reflected, it's early in the year, but it's clear that almost within the partnership we've got a very challenging financial position, both in terms of delivering the savings, but also actually delivering against operational budgets. And I think we're seeing quite a few challenges coming through there. So we've asked that the next committee meeting that Elaine bring us a bit more detail, particularly around about areas like learning disability spend, which has got quite a significant forecast overspend in it, a continuation of previous years, care at home spend, and something on the savings and delivery plan. But I think we recognising the point that Alex made, it is early in the year, and it's difficult to draw concrete conclusions from where you are, but it's getting that balance between, well, it's early in the year or it's too late in the year, so it's trying to get in there. So I think yeah, we need that. We received a good update on the primary care improvement plan. We got a really good update in there in terms of where we're moving forward, the issues in there, and actually the success we're seeing in there to continue our theme. I think that we're building on this morning. There are some very good success stories in there, which I think we could probably be bringing out a little bit more. I'm always particularly keen to push the success of the community link workers, because I think they're making such a big impact on there. Claire Copeland spoke, I think, very well on the need, what we've got in the context for we need a primary care strategy in terms of where exactly are we intending to go in primary care. So it was actually really good to hear that. We don't have a timeline for it, and I'm not asking for a timeline for it, but it was really important that we actually we think about that, because we keep talking about the context of locum spend, particularly in 2C practices, but we need a context to actually to measure that against in terms of where we want to be and how we will deliver services going forward. So that was really good. We had our annual report from the Highland Drug and Alcohol Recovery Service team. Teresa Green came along and gave us a really, as always, a very enthusiastic update, and we were delighted to receive a report that we were being measured green in our implementation of all the MAT standards, which I think is no mean feat at all, and I think the team are to be congratulated there on actually achieving that. And I was actually, just because, and it was purely because of timing, I was able to invite Teresa to a very recent session of the chairs and vice chairs of the IGB network, and Teresa came along and did a presentation there, and our work within the DARS team has actually been recognised nationally and even internationally. I believe there's some of the team making their way to European parts to present on some of the really excellent work that's ongoing there. So that was really, really positive. We received an update on the vaccination transformation plan and the improvement programme, and I think if I'm being absolutely honest, it was disappointing for the members in terms of what we got, because it didn't really quite hit the mark of what we needed in terms of where are we against our improvement plan, what changes are we making, what are the timelines. So I don't think we could take the full assurance that we required to do there, and in that context we're asking for a more detailed update to come back to the next committee, I think in beginning of November, I think it is, in terms of, and I described it using my language of we need the names, dates, and places in terms of where we're intending to be, where we're hoping to be, because I think we recognise that even at that point a few weeks ago, we had already entered the early stages of the winter vaccination programme, so it was clear that we were going to have a transition ongoing while the delivery programme was ongoing, and the complications that might bring. So I think that's one we will receive back at our next meeting. We received the new version of the IPQR, which I think brought us a lot more information, and I think, and our thanks to Lorraine and the team for that. And I think again, it's just recognising it as work in progress, as David has said, and we've seen changes to the board today. So, but I think that's good, and we did receive the internal audit reports on adult social care services and complex care packages. We didn't take them really as specific items. We used them as themes to discuss as we were going through finance. We took into the context of the learning disability report. And obviously, and Fiona has spoken about the mission on the 90-day target. And I think that, again, is something we've asked to come back to the committee in November, just to see exactly where we are, given that we will be technically at the end of the 90-day period there, to see exactly where we will be. And finally, we received the annual report for 23-24 of the partnership, which is an excellent read, and I would commend it to everyone to download it and have a read at it, and our thanks to the team for producing that. Thank you very much, Sarah, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jerry. Yeah, I know you had a lot of stuff in that meeting, so I agree. Well done on everybody for getting through all of that. It's no mean feat. I've got a couple of questions, but others may have as well. I wonder, in a minute, I might ask Tim to come in around the vaccinations, because obviously that is a key priority for us. So I'll see if Tim can speak a little bit to that one. But before I bring Tim in, just a couple of bits from what you were saying there, Jerry. Really pleased to hear you mention under the primary care section about the 2C practices, because obviously we do have a number of 2C practices, and so it's recognizing I think you're right. I think we need a robust primary care strategy, but it's going to have to encompass both methods of delivering that primary care, both through our contracted arrangements with independent providers and our 2C practices as well, because of course what's going to be important here is the equity of access, and regardless of how that primary care is delivered. And as we know, primary care and prevention is a really key priority for us. So I was glad to hear you talking about that, and look forward to seeing that coming forward. I think that's going to be really critical for us. The other bit that I was really interested to see pop up there was underneath the alcohol and drugs report around the care for prison people within the prison service. And of course, something that came up recently at the Board Chairs Away Day was a conversation around, obviously, as a health board, we are responsible for the healthcare for prisoners whilst they are in prison, but we are, of course, still responsible for them as they come out of prison. And there was some conversation actually around readiness for some of the proposals around kind of early release, and identifying risks that might be elevated with early release of prisoners, and particularly, that's a really vulnerable time for people as they come out of prison, particularly under, if they have alcohol and drug use challenges. So there might be something for us as a board to take away and have a think about if we need to adjust our approach, taking into account the potential for early release proposals that are coming through Scottish Government. you prompted me, that just you reminded me of that, so that would be interesting to pick up. But Tim, I wonder if I could bring you in just to say a little something about the vaccines, please.
Thanks. I think Jerry's criticisms are reasonable. And I think perhaps the way that information was presented to the Highland Health and Social Care Committee wasn't as good as it could be. I think the role of one of the roles of the committee is around seeking assurance and monitoring the delivery of the service. And I think there wasn't enough information there around how things have been delivered and how things are being planned for the future. I think it was a bit more general. So we need to make sure that in the future, and this is perhaps it was a more general paper and reflected, I think, that there's been less input in terms of vaccination to Highland Health and Social Care Committee than there has been to other committees. In terms of the overall performance on vaccination, things are showing a degree of improvement. I think adult vaccination is reasonable and reasonably in line with national levels, although we're looking for it to be higher. In terms of children's vaccination, there is some signs of improvement, more so in the 6-in-1 vaccinations, including whooping cough, as opposed to measles, mumps and rubella, the MMR, which is reasonably flat, not showing much improvement. What is showing an improvement is the promptness of vaccination. So we are seeing we're seeing an improvement in the service and the speed of vaccinations. We have a vaccination improvement group, which has a detailed work plan in light of the escalation from Scottish Government on performance, and in light of the peer review that we've had from Public Health Scotland, which has got lots of detailed actions around implementing the improvements in the service, and that will the progress on that will be relayed to the Highland Health and Social Care Committee at the next meeting. By and large, things are looking positive, and there's a lot of good progress, but it will take some more time to make sure that we've established a really robust system. The other main element that we're looking at is around options for the service model, and what is the best way to deliver vaccination in a patient focused way or public focused way within Highland. Work is coming. Another paper came to the Executive Directors Group yesterday on that. There's still a little bit more work to do there to get things finalised, but there's a large degree of progress.
Okay, thank you, Tim. And obviously we don't want to rehash the whole committee, so we'll take that update and obviously see further updates as they come through. There's a lot of work going on there, but still a lot to be done. We recognise that. Any other questions for the Highland Health and Social Care Committee? Alex, please.
Yes. Thanks. Yeah. It's just I didn't know whether to raise this at the IPQR or now. I suppose now is probably just as good as any. Winter plan. Normally by now we would have seen something. I haven't seen anything. I don't. Is there anything coming to yourselves? Pam's got her hand up. So
yeah, I was going to say Pam has the ready-made answer for that one.
So thanks. Just to say that in terms of the 90-day improvement plan that we've stood up for rapid improvement, our intention is, with learning from previous years and following the same format, that we'll stand up pieces of work that we need to in order to address winter pressures. But I do understand that the Scottish Government is about to communicate to the boards the requirements around winter planning. So we'll review that programme because we're in the first 90 days of it that will conclude at the end of October. So early sight of that will help us to refresh and refine that plan going forward. So we're expecting a communication. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. And Muriel, you've got a question. I'll bring you in.
Yes, thank you, and thanks, Jerry. I think Jerry deserves applause for the way he handles the very extensive agenda in that committee, so very grateful to the way he does it. Just an observation, Sarah, something that you said, it's not an answer for today, but the early release, would that be something that could the CPP could assist with, because that's got everybody around the table?
Yes, absolutely. I think this is entirely a partnership matter. I think you're absolutely right, Muriel. So we can take that away. I think it'll be something for us and all of our partners to consider in how we react to that. Definitely. Thank you, Muriel. Okie dokie. Right. Sorry, just lost my place there. So that was Highland Health and Social Care Committee. Next, I'm going to invite Alistair in to update us, linking to the minutes that we have in our pack from the Clinical Governance Committee, which took place on the 5th of September. So, Alistair, your highlights, please.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Two of the things I was going to mention have already been mentioned by colleagues. One was the vaccination, so I'm not going to rehearse that. And the other was the research, development and innovation annual report, which I think Anne referred to earlier on. However, I would urge colleagues to read that annual report, because it contains some very interesting information that is perhaps more left field to what we usually discuss as a committee, and you can show quite clearly the direction of travel and the things that are being looked at there. On other matters, once again, the committee discussed the NDAS situation and noted the action plan that had been drawn up, and noted that the issues that had previously been discussed had been escalated to both the chief executive of our organisation and also the chief executive of the Highland Council, and to actually steer this through to make sure things are happening. And it looks like with the programme board being set up and posts going out to advert on this, that we're seeing some improvement on there. A topic that the committee had discussed before, we revisited, and it's one that's probably familiar to many people, and that's the issues on dental services in the communities, and the difficulty that Highland residents and folk are having of accessing a dentist close to where they might live, and we revisited that. Not with a particular positive outcome, but we're seeking more concrete data on the situation to enable us to feed in and report to the national picture on that. So that's one that we will be coming back to again. We had quite an in-depth look at the pressures surrounding the acute services and the patient flow around the hospital, and that's also going to be discussed later on this agenda in terms of delayed discharges. But the committee empathised and acknowledged the problems that staff were actually encountering and the pressures in terms of the acute services. And I think the final point I want to draw attention to, and it's one again, Sarah, I think it'd be one that would be very useful for colleagues to look at, is the tremendous outcomes that we've had from the Organ and Tissue Donation Committee, where we have maximised every opportunity we can in talking to patients and their patients' families at times of distress about donations, and Highland is doing exceptionally well in having these difficult conversations at a time of real stress and grief to families, but also the benefits that it's brought to other families and other individuals. And we were able to take substantial assurance from the work that's been carried out on that area, and obviously we welcome the positive outcome for so many people from those donations. I'm quite happy to answer any questions that people have on that, but I think again it was a lengthy agenda, but we covered many interesting topics, and thanks to the committee members for making it a positive meeting.
Thank you, Alistair. That was a really helpful update, and as you said, really welcome what you said about the organ and tissue donation, and commend the staff that are doing that work, because that's definitely not an easy thing, but very important. So thanks for bringing that to our attention. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Alistair? Again, as Alistair pointed out, a very full agenda that went through clinical governance, I suppose reflective of the work that we're all doing across the board. Okay, no questions. Thank you, Alistair. Appreciated. Next, I'm going to invite Gaynor, last time Gaynor, to give us an update from the Audit Committee, which took place on the 10th of September.
Thank you, Chair. So at our Audit Committee, 2 out of 3 of the audit reports that were planned for the September meeting were reported to committee. So that was on patient transport and external accommodation. The third audit, property transaction the third audit that was meant to come to committee has been deferred until December. So in December there should be 4 audits that come for review, and currently these are on track to come to that meeting. We also had an update on our property transaction monitoring. We have this done on an annual basis, but this year there were no qualifying transactions that would result in a property transaction monitoring audit. We looked at the management actions resulting from our internal audits, and these are progressing quite well, with the majority of actions being on track with either original or revised dates, and these revised dates have all been agreed by the Audit Committee. And the Audit Committee has an overview of how these are progressing. In particular, Jerry mentioned that the audits around adult social care and complex care packages were taken to the Highland Health and Social Care Committee, and the Audit Committee also expects an update on those in December. The other thing I wanted to point out, we had a paper asking for assurance around, or giving assurance around adult social care advance payments and our standing financial instructions. So these had been previously amended to fit in with the current practice that we have, where we give advance payments to, and this was done prior to us taking up the integration model, and it was to help small providers with sustainability issues. The amendments are no longer included in our standing financial instructions, and so the adult social care team had been requested to set out the actions for assurance to the board, and that the risk had been properly considered and mitigations were in place to limit that risk. So on behalf of the board, the committee accepted the minimum risk associated with the continuation of existing payments in advance, and accepted moderate assurance from the report. So these are advance payments over small chunks of time. The committee also received assurance from the Information Assurance Group, and also around our counter fraud. In terms of counter fraud, we also looked at the counter fraud standard submission that's due to be submitted to Scottish Government. And the committee noted and accepted this substantial assurance around our ongoing counter fraud activities, and noted that we complied with the majority of the standards. And all that's left for me to say is that Susan will chair the December meeting, and yeah, I think that's us. I'll take any questions. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Gaynor. And just to say a big thank you to yourself and the committee for getting through a power of work. That's much appreciated. Okay, any questions or comments for Gaynor for Audit Committee? No, okay, thank you, Gaynor. And now we don't have Katrina with us today, do we? We had apologies for Katrina, but the minutes are in the pack. We'll take them as read, but I'm happy if anybody has any questions, we can we can bring them out just now and get Katrina to pick them up later on, or one of the other execs might be able to pick them up. If not, we'll just note those. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands up. So we're being asked to confirm that adequate assurance has been provided from our board governance committees and note those minutes and agreed actions. Are we all happy to do that? Great. And that takes us smoothly into the IPQR. So obviously we've just had a very fulsome update from our committee chairs, but this is an opportunity for us to pick up anything that we haven't just discussed. And I will hand over to David, please.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Morning, colleagues. You'll have the IPQR in your combined papers from pages around 230 onwards. You'll see that the size of it is growing, so I think that review that we've got scheduled for October would be helpful. I noticed the action is about frugal governance. I'm not sure frugal would be the word I would use about the report this week, but comprehensive is what I would say. And you'll just to draw your attention to a few things. Firstly is the executive summary. We had quite a lot of discussion on this, as Alex mentioned, at FPR. We had shown some supplementary information which hopefully is helpful when we look at the executive summary. So just to point out a few things. Firstly, where we have an ADP target, then that is the ADP target, and that's the target we're going to be measuring our red, amber and green against. Where there is no ADP target, then we're looking against national targets. And then the other element to that is we have added in what our performance was in 23-24, just so that that is a good reference point when looking at our performance in relation to this year's and their targets, as well as last year in terms of context. So hopefully that will be helpful. Also, as was mentioned by Anne, the people metrics have extended considerably in terms of them, split out between acute Highland community and the Argyll and Bute partnership performance reports, and they are also available. Also, we've added the Argyll and Bute IGB performance metrics that you'll see in the pack. We mentioned vaccinations earlier. One of the requests was to have children's vaccinations performance, and that also is included in the pack. The overall request in terms of assurance we have put as moderate. That has been modified due again to further discussions that we had. This is in relation to our ADP performance, and I would recommend that would be for your review today. So with that, I will open up for questions, and also I'm sure I will get the support of my colleagues to answer any questions that you would have for us today. Alistair, I'll come to you first.
Yes, thanks, David, and thanks for the report. It's just as you're getting used to the format of report, it changes dramatically. But I think I quite like the new format that we're getting. I do appreciate that it is growing larger, and I think you're right. We've got to home in on the key performance indicators that are telling us something important. A couple of things. I'm not sure I like the idea of putting something green on the basis that it meets the target ADP but doesn't meet the national target, and I'm not sure that the performance rating for something like emergency access, although not meeting targets, second of the mainland boards, I'm not that really sure. I'm a little bit worried about some of the phraseology on that, especially as later on the urgent unscheduled care, we talk about the problems we have in terms of some of that relating to emergency access with ambulances and so forth. I don't understand why the 31-day cancer target is showing against national target as green, unless I've misread it. We've actually didn't achieve the targets. I'm not sure if I'm missing something on that, David, or if it's actually needing adjusted. I think it would be better if we could show the performance against the national target and the performance against the ADP in perhaps two separate columns, so it wasn't so confusing. As you look down the performance rating, it goes from national target to ADP back to national target. And I'm not sure that's particularly helpful on that. I'm also not sure on the 5% off target being amber if the trajectory is worsening. If the trajectory is improving, I can see why it might be amber, but I think on one of them the trajectory wasn't improving and we're showing as amber. But I think this is quite early days on the iterations of this of this new style of reporting, but they're my initial observations so far. Thank you.
Thanks, Alistair. Just to maybe better explain where the targets are set, I think it's recognisable, and we had the discussion the last time around that from a national perspective. I mean, if you take waiting times targets in general, or even ED performance, government have not changed their targeting when actually the standard across Scotland has deviated significantly from that, both pre-COVID as well as post-COVID. And so therefore, the ADP target is what we have identified and proposed that a reasonable comparison is done. I think if I recall, the actual national targets are probably contained within the detail report as opposed to the executive summary. And that's just about trying to maintain a level of summary associated with the targets. But I do take your feedback on board. There is a key at the top with regard to green, amber and red. And again, happy to take feedback and maybe we put that into our October session in terms of what the tolerance level would be with regard to green, amber and red. That is subjective from that point of view. But I would also point out for some of them, and I'm sure Catherine, I've heard discuss at FP&R, where the national position and the national feedback from national teams has been very positive in terms of what we're doing, while we were, if I could describe it, as being overly critical of ourselves compared with how we were being compared nationally. So I do recognise that it is a little bit subjective to that, but hopefully we won't lose the sight of the objectivity of both the targets that we've committed to this year and the targets that have been set from a national perspective. We did clearly state at the beginning of our planning stages that we would, where previously we have overcommitted in terms of delivery that put us into a more difficult financial position. We recognised that all boards were looking at committing based on resources they had available, albeit we were being pushed to make as stretch targets as possible. And so therefore it's acknowledged that we may well not hit, and we wouldn't hit national targets in some cases. So therefore they are less relevant for the progress reporting within years. So hopefully that explains it in terms of that, but it is something that we can continue the dialogue around.
Yeah, David, sorry, I just want to come in there actually, using chair's privilege. I think the points you make there, Alistair, are really important. I suppose I would reflect over the many iterations of the IPQR that we've had. It's challenging, isn't it? Because we all have kind of personal preferences for how the data is displayed, and there's that real balance between making it easy to digest, but detailed enough that it reflects the nuance. So I think David's right. We can take that into the October development session for some further discussion. I suspect we may never land on an exact presentation that keeps us all happy all of the time, and we'll have to balance the data with the narrative. But I think what's really important for us as a board is that question, we haven't maybe used this phrase for a while, but that so what question. And I'm really keen that whilst we use the evidence and the data and we're benchmarking and looking at the targets, what's really important for us as a board is to consider the people at the centre of that, and the, you know, what's the story that's being told and what do we need to do. But I think your points are really well made, Alistair, so thank you for bringing that in. But sorry, David, I butted in there. I'll hand back over to you.
Not at all. It's absolutely a privilege to do so. Can I come to Karen, please?
Thank you. And I'm also really appreciating some elements of the report and seeing the depth of information that perhaps is more useful in some areas, and again around that setting priorities and what the board's focus should be. So it's definitely for me still an adjustment to kind of work out all the works. My observation and questions really relate to the appraisal rates across the IGB and Highland Health Social Care Partnership. And while we won't have time to go into the detail of perhaps my questions, and I know that some of you will know I've asked this question a number of times, or iterations of this question. So I'm going to ask, is there a way to show the benchmarking of where our appraisal rates sit across other boards? Is there a way to show comparison with previous years? And the reason I ask that is just to see if we can understand why the rates aren't changing, because you know, it's such an important part of our staff governance and also our strategic planning. If we don't have appraisal rates, how do we make a plan for training, for example? How do we make a section plan? And all these things that we know are so important. And given the conversations that we've had around recruitment, retention and onboarding, you know, it's so critical to staff welfare. So I would really appreciate if there's a way to kind of work out where we sit within the wider system. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. I'll maybe come to Gareth if he wants to pick that one up, please.
Yeah, happy to. There isn't a readily available benchmarking data set on the appraisal rates, but what I would say is that, having spoken to colleagues across Scotland through the HRD network, we are, I would say, lower down in the pecking order, quite a long way down. So I think the focus for us is about improve. So benchmarking helps us understand where we might sit. But I think personally, I think my colleagues would share this view, is it's not where it needs to be, and it's very low. So we do need to improve it. So with that in mind, we have launched within the last month the improvement plan. So the first phase of that was discussed to some extent in committee, is that all directors' direct reports and the next layer down with the organisation should be complete by December, and then there'll be a further follow-up cascade in terms of managers in the management structure focusing on that. So we have agreed a plan, an improvement plan, and we've got trajectories in there in terms of that for the first couple of layers. So it is something that's absolutely important, and I've been talking about it since I started last July, so it's not something I would disagree with board members on at all, and it's about how we shift it. There are some potentially, I don't think this explains it all, but I think that we're also doing some education around use of the system, because we also think some of it's not being recorded appropriately. Discussions may well have taken place. They may have even been typed into the system. It isn't always the most intuitive to sign off, so getting the sign-off data back out the system sometimes is a problem. However, I don't think that accounts for the big difference that we do have, so we still need to focus on that. So, like I say, it's not all data is available at national level for benchmarking, but I think the focus for us is to improve.
Thanks, Gareth, and thanks for raising that, Karen. Susan, can I come to you, please?
Thank you, David. And I had that same observation, Karen, about the appraisal. So thank you for raising that. But another question I had was about how we're presenting the trajectories that we've put into some of the data here. It's something we have talked about a lot, and how helpful it is to see that forward look on some of the issues, but this is a general point about how they're sometimes shown. I'm not certain that they represent an analysis that's been applied to the data that shows what we think the forward position will actually be, because when we get very flat lines, I'm thinking, look at the treatment time guarantee that's on page 252, 253 of our pack. We're showing the actual is on a steady, incline, and yet the trajectory for the rest of the year is absolutely flat. It's showing that it's not going to carry on as it is. And I'm not certain that that's our own executives' analysis of what's going to happen, or if it's some artifact of the logarithms that we're using. Could someone help me with that? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll maybe bring Lorraine in if you want to answer that, but it varies depending on the type of metric that we're looking at. Some of that is indeed the case. So for some of our waiting times, we're not showing an improvement. It's a maintaining at the current level based on the comments I was making earlier. And some there are specific plans to do. I wouldn't say that it's, but Lorraine, do you want to come in and add any more colour to that, please?
Thanks, and this is brought up in FRP committee as well, that there's flat lines. I guess we do that, and there is seasonal variation. So sometimes there will be, more operations done for TTG, sometimes there'll be less, and we do flatline them at the moment. If you look at the additions and the scene, they're almost on a flat line too. If we increase outpatients, so there's around a 23 to 28% increase in outpatients, conversion rates from outpatients. So the more outpatients that we do in specific surgery areas, the line may change. So the team are looking at, for example, the additional 30 million monies that we got, or share of 30 million, will that, the current conversion rate, lead to a change in the TTG trajectories? So that will be revised, Susan, for the next one. Now we've got a better understanding of that conversion rates from what we're currently doing, and also a better understanding of conversion rates from the long waiting patients, which is also a key focus. Thanks.
Thanks, Susan. If there are follow-ups and there are specific questions to these that we don't get answered within the time frame that we have, I'm more than happy to support a discussion out with the meeting for anyone. Anne, can I come to you, please?
Okay, so I think just some general comments to feed into the discussion, the further discussion we're going to have about data and how we use it, and then a very specific question. So I think that the revised format is going to prompt some really important discussion at that development session, and I do have some things to feed in to be sort of answered or considered at that session, but there are some aspects of this that I really like. I think it's really important to have our ADP targets reflected in the document, as much from, so that we can see whether we are doing what we have promised we would do, which is, for me, just as important as whether or not we're meeting any national targets. So, like Alistair, there's probably a couple of things that I'd like to see explored a bit more in that development session. One is the issue of variation in performance being identified in what we see. We've previously had national level training indicating that that's a really key issue in terms of allowing us to focus our discussion on areas where it's not common cause or expected variation. So that's something I'd like to throw into the pot. And also I'd like to pick up on the introduction of the average performance in 23-24, and just ask for some discussion about that as being the best comparator. I think I've read recently a number of reports, Audit Scotland that had a brief look at the Darcy report, and I think there's some, I think what would help us in terms of getting that balance between national targets and ADP performance is if there is at the moment a Scottish Government view about how we should be comparing our performance, what we should be comparing our performance against. Are we trying to get back to pre-COVID levels of productivity, or do we accept that because of changing demographics, because of the impact of the pandemic, that's no longer a realistic aim for us, and that it's year-on-year improvement in performance? So that's something that I'd be interested in discussing more at the development session. But I think it's really good to continue to have changes to the format that prompt this kind of discussion, even though it is quite tricky to sort of get used to them quickly. So just and I think it's good that we're continuing to think about how this data is presented to us. My very specific question, and again something I really welcome in the changing format of the report, is the introduction of more specific information about inequalities that may be existing in our services. And I'd just like to ask a question that maybe, because everybody knows I'm not that good with numbers, I'm certainly not a statistician, so maybe I've completely misinterpreted this. But I was really interested in the information about NDAS service. Now, I've interpreted this as telling us that, I'm not sure if it's children or families, in the least, the quartile 3 and 4 of the least deprived socioeconomic conditions are making more use of this service than those in the most deprived communities. And for me, that raised a kind of question as to whether there might be unmet need in our communities, who are in the most deprived socioeconomic circumstances in relation to use of this service, because it's probably not what I would have expected. Clearly issues about neurodevelopment can happen for any family anywhere, but that really interested me, and I wondered if anybody was able to comment, either to tell me I've completely misinterpreted it, or to make some comment on whether this should be of concern, because I know that we're going to be redesigning the service, and if it is a concern, then it's really important that the redesign of the service takes this into account. Thanks.
Thanks, and I'll maybe come to Tim. I see he's got his hand up, so I'll come to Tim first. Thanks.
Thanks. I'd certainly like to echo Anne's welcome of the inequalities within NDAS, and I think it's really good that that it's included. I'd be keen to have a lot more inclusion of inequalities information within the reporting that we do. We're considering that in general at the Population Health Programme Board tomorrow, and inequalities is the theme for my next public health annual report. So I think one of those themes, one of those pick-up and recommendations will be a more widespread use of inequalities within the reporting arrangement. When it comes to NDAS, I think it certainly is interesting, but I think it's more for the moment looking at that and hypothesis generating and thinking, what does that mean, and how does that affect what we're going to have, what we need to do for planning? And I think that's initially the most important element of it. I think looking at the figures as they stand, we've got a few more steps to work out exactly what it means, because it depends both on geographical distribution, but also on the distribution of inequalities within Highland, which within Highland we don't tend to have either the large numbers of people at the most deprived quintile or at the least deprived. So we need to take that on board. What it definitely shows is that we're not talking about a predominant group of people either in the most affluent or in the least affluent areas. There's a mix of people coming through for NDAS services. I think there is certainly a concern about the effect on inequalities and that we're not reaching those who are in the most deprived areas. We're not reaching all of them. We're clearly reaching some from the information, but I think it's something that we need to look at. And I think if we don't have this type of information at all, then there's a danger of ignoring it. Now that we've got it, we need to look at it, and we're right to look at it and to say, what does that mean for NDAS? And clearly we're concerned around that for a whole lot of reasons. But what does it mean for other services as well? I was delighted. I met one of the Raigmore consultants couple of weeks ago, who was interested and inspired by the presentation from Sir Michael Marmot when he was presenting at a conference in Inverness. And this particular consultant had done his own analysis of inequalities on his own patient inflow and admissions, and was very intrigued and surprised by the results. So I think the more that we can get inequalities mainstreamed in our reporting and in the work that we're doing, the better. So it's a really good start.
Thanks, Tim. But thanks for your comments. And of course, this is the assessment service that's been measured, and it's not to say that's the level of support for families and individuals alone. In fact, that's one of the redesigns, is to make sure that we're using assessments in a balanced way. But no, I appreciate your comments. I'm conscious of time, but we'll keep going. Muriel, please.
I won't repeat anything my colleagues have said, but I think it's testament to the detail in the paper, the number of questions it's generated. So I think it's important to reflect the detail. One thing, in light of all the questions and comments that my colleagues have raised, should the paper be moved from moderate assurance to limited assurance? Because there are so many areas that I feel we need work on.
Okay, I shall leave that for the chair to handle that question towards the end of the paper, if that's okay. But thank you. Alex?
Thanks, David. A couple of things. One, in follow-up to the answer that Karen got on the appraisal, which is still way short of where it should be, Gareth. You're right. It's not good. The internal benchmark is very interesting. I'm looking on page 286, and the NTC are almost double where acute services are. Now, I know it's a smaller sample in terms of the number of staff that's there, but do we understand why that management team have managed to get their appraisals higher than any other? I mean, if you look at Caithness General and Acute, for example, they're almost half of what the NTC have managed in that particular one. And then similarly on Statman, and no apologies for me banging on about Statman, do we understand why there are two training, one on violence and aggression and one on, what's the one above it? I can't read it. Anyway, the one directly above the violence and aggression, why that is universally so low across the Statman training complex. When you look at some of the others, the ones that are, in my mind, medically, like infection control, hand hygiene, etc., they're very, very high. The ones that are more general tend to be very, very low. Now, is that because people think, our staff think, that's not actually applicable to me, or I don't have that as a problem, or I don't really see that's something that we should be trained on? I don't know, but there's something there that we need to look at to understand, because it isn't just one part that's low on violence and aggression, it's every single part of it. So the great thing for me for this data is it's starting to give us answers or at least it's starting to give us where we should be questioning rather than necessarily where we need answers. So I really like it. I like the format, etc. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. I'll come to Gareth. Gareth.
Thanks. So in terms of the appraisals, I suppose I'm going to be careful not to lead to making assumptions here. What we do know is that both for Statman and for appraisals, and this is probably experience I have from other boards as well, is that where we find that the rates tend to be lower and tend to be barriers, the barriers tend to be the amount of time you can release people from the shop floor, for want of a better word. So pressured, difficult areas. So where I was before, just to give you an example from the Golden Jubilee, the area that's consistently was low was theatres, biggest cohort of staff, because of the sort of drive to make sure theatres were operating 24/7, 100%. Managers were quite often filling in and jumping into theatre shifts. So just to give you a flavour of, you don't really understand it until you go and speak to people. So I think that's why breaking it down into areas like this is important, so we can work with the exec colleagues for those areas and say, okay, can you start looking at this and understanding what the barriers are? And I think it's just a different way of framing it, because I think everybody agrees that these are both important areas. It's understanding where they sit in the priorities. I think one of the real challenges for healthcare is that there's rightly in the right way, in a way, is that the first priority for nearly everybody is patient care and delivery of service. So care for everybody, not just patients, but clients. So it does make it right in terms of the impact on other things, but you do tend to see that tendency to go to the first thing, which is making sure that people are on the shop floor. So trying to understand the barriers is the most important thing, I think, for driving these things forwards. And then giving a bit of focus to it is the other thing, as they say, this is important. So Statman is kind of definitely in that kind of space where it's got up to a certain level, but why isn't it moving further? So again, on that vein, been giving it a bit of thought. We've tried different reporting, and that's made a bit of a difference. And people have welcomed that. So that's been a welcome from across the system in terms of being able to see data in a different way, to focus their effort. One of the things we're thinking about at the moment is exactly that, Alex, is why are some modules really successful and others not? I suspect the hand hygiene and so on is very applicable and important to most folks, so it kind of hits the top of that. I also think it's probably how accessible the units are. Some of them are half an hour, some of them are an hour. So it's 5.5 hours in total of e-learning, which is quite a lot. And one of the other thoughts we've been having is whether we break it down into a subsequent plan to say, well, this month let's focus on this particular one, everybody do that, and that's just like that will break it down into maybe half an hour with 45 minutes or whatever per session. But to give you, I think the staying safe online is an hour, which is quite long for that kind of subject. So it's not saying it's not important, because it is. It's just thinking about how we can balance that. So in summary, I think we need to keep focusing on that and understanding, why are some things. Recent conversation around fire safety was an interesting one. I think it's something I've had recently a conversation about this, and I do wonder if it's quite low. However, I do wonder whether we're focusing on the right things, because as an example, we teach people about fighting fires and fire extinguishers and so on, when actually in reality the main thing is we actually say you need to know evacuation drills, and we don't actually expect anybody to be actually fighting fires. So somebody was telling me recently they have another approach in another organization where say if that's you can actually skip that part and say actually that's not what we want to go teach people. So a bit of debate about how we make it engaging, interesting, and relevant is probably right. But I think still there's an element of breaking it down. So hopefully that gives you a bit of assurance that we're continuing to think about how we address this. Appraisal rates. So what was I going to say on that? I think sorry, just remind me what your question was on the appraisal rates. I've gone into too much detail on Statman.
So, because Karen asked about benchmarking, and there wasn't any. Yeah. What I'm saying is there's an internal benchmark there, yeah. Because NTC are much higher, considerably higher than the others. But as I say, that may be it's a new cohort, and B, it's a smaller cohort than some of the others.
Yeah, and I think I think the other aspect is it's also very planned. It's planned elective care, so it's probably a very calm, kind of environment to work in, would be my assessment of that. So, but again, I'm making assumptions on behalf of others here, so maybe Catherine will want to come in on that. But I think you're right, the data is helpful to break it down to give us a bit of that depth. And I'll stop there.
Thanks. Catherine, did you want to come in on that point? And then we'll move on.
Yeah, so the NTC has been set up to ensure that the capacity is within the workforce to actually deliver on staff investment and time for training. And and one of the ethoses with the staff coming in is that, we would focus in terms of that and ensure that they are getting that. I guess my observation might be that it should be higher than it currently is, and we should be doing better in that particular facility. So a reflection around that. In terms of the discrepancy, we are examining that within the acute senior leadership team as to, why is it we can do it over here and we struggle to do that over here. And some of it is cultural issues and ways of working, and some of it is actually capacity and time available for staff. And violence and aggression training in particular needs an element of it's not just online training, it needs to be coordinated with in-room trainers and, physical types of training, Alex. So I think we just need to recognise there's some of that as well. There's some nuances in there to be understood. Thanks.
Thanks, Catherine. Jerry, I've saved the best to last. If I can come to you for your final question, thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. Just to say, I am so looking forward to our session in October now, because I think there's the scope for so much discussion there. And my plea to Sarah and Fiona will be is make sure we have lots of time for discussion, which is my code word for not death by PowerPoint, please. I think David picked up lots of the issues I had written down there. One of the first things I'd written down was 89 pages. Oh my word, how do we read this? But actually, when you go through it, you say, well, actually it's 89 pages, but I need more, and it's more and more and more. So I think one of the things we need to think about is what do we take to the board and what do we take to the committees for actually a lot more scrutiny. And getting into that detail, and I use in particular, and apologies to Catherine when we spoke about this at the Finance Committee a couple of weeks ago. Catherine gave a very eloquent and very articulate narrative on TTG, and really homed in, and I can't remember which specialty it was, Catherine, and it explained so much of the variance, but it was at a level of detail that you couldn't possibly have captured in the written report. But actually just it took us to a place where it actually said, well, 90% of our services are actually doing fine. It's this one particular area over here, and if you eliminate that, we're going that. I think Alistair's point about what we measure ourselves as red or green against is actually is really important. And I think we have to actually say, well, what is it we're trying to demonstrate by saying it's red or green? Because I think that there is that element in there as well. Yes, there's the absolute, it's against the target, but it's actually, I think it is really so important that we're actually demonstrating that, are we doing what we said we would do? That was our commitment. And then we can worry about whether what we said we would do is considered good enough by other parties. But that I think that takes us into the area of Alex always speaking about in terms of stretch targets, which is where we want to be. I think the final point for me was really just to pick up, and it was only because I've been reading the papers for the GMC for tomorrow, and I was reading the HSAP annual report. I appreciate that it can't be the same data all the time, but I'm picking particularly on MMR vaccines here, and I don't want anybody to delve into the detail, but we've got the data which is in the IPQR, which I think is at 16 months and 3 years and 8 months, and then there's the HSCP report is at 5 years. They give you quite a different picture from where we are, which may well be true. But I think if we looked at this report, we would say we're in a could do better and would like to do better in MMR. Whereas if you look at the HSCP annual report under child vaccines for MMR, it says, yeah, we're actually doing pretty well. And those two messages, and those two messages might be true, but I think we just have to get that consistency. So we do look at that. And I think one of the areas which has been really good in this revised report is getting some more data, is getting some more narrative in there. But I do think we just have to reflect and be careful on some of the languages which is in the narrative. I wrote down some of it just to pick on. It says better outcomes might be achieved if managed in primary care. Now that could be read as why you're referring into the service, or it could be read as actually it would be better if you didn't do it in there. And I have to say I understood the sentiment, but I didn't like the phrase awareness of new waiting time guidance to ensure that only those who are fit, willing and able remain on the waiting list. I did it that again be taken as an implication that we will use that to cleanse a waiting list. Whereas the principle might be sound, but I think we just need to think about the language. But I really like it. I think it's really beginning to bring out some of that deeper understanding that we need. But I think we need to think about the role of the committee and the time that a committee now can take to actually scrutinise some of that rather than the board. Thank you very much, David.
Thanks, Jerry. That's really helpful in terms of your comments. I'm always happy to take some detailed comments that you've got back, either within the board discussion or out with that. Happy to do that. And I'll give some thought to how we collect some questions for that development session going forward, so that it will give us a chance to try to assimilate the various questions and comments from all of you. So I'll certainly take that away. Gareth wanted to come in on one last point. Gareth, then
very quickly, is just to note that violence and aggression management of violence and aggression as training has been changed. Previously, the online module was only for a subset, and that was non-patient facing or public facing. We now have a module that's applicable to all staff, so the denominator has changed. They previously, the only option was to go for a face-to-face training, but I was keen to introduce something as an online module, so that could be something people could do if they were still waiting for the face-to-face training. So it's just to note that is a change in that's why there's a change in the data.
Thanks, Gareth. Chair, if I can hand back to you, sorry for allowing us to slip over time, and I shall hand back and you can discuss the level of assurance take. Thanks.
Thank you, David. And it's time well spent. And colleagues, I really appreciate how engaged everybody is and given this your thorough attention. Obviously, scrutinising the performance is the most important thing that we have to do here. So I do appreciate that we've given that our best. And I suppose the length of discussion today is just reflective of the breadth and complexity of the services that we are providing across all kinds of settings, community right through to acute, and all the bits in between. To pick up the assurance, just a couple of points actually. So we're pinning a lot on this October development session. That's fine. I've taken lots of notes. Interesting discussions around ADP versus national targets. And I think actually it's worth reminding ourselves the ADP isn't something that we keep secret. We create that and submit it to Scottish Government. And whilst there is variance in our ADP versus a standardised national target, our ADP is approved by Scottish Government. So I think we just need to bear that in mind. And yes, we do still need to look at the differences there and be content about what we're measuring ourselves against. We have to remember the ADP isn't a secret document that we keep in a cupboard. It's very much out there in the open. So I think that's important to remember. Jerry, just to pick up your point, you're absolutely right. The more you see, the more you want to see, and that is the eternal balance of a governance committee at this level. We know that there are there's a network of operational governance structures that sit around, below, alongside us, and so we need to be mindful of that balance. To pick up the assurance question or challenge that Muriel's put to us, so this is a tricky one. So at the moment we're being the assurance level that's being proposed today is moderate. I recognise your point, Muriel, about actually should it be limited given the areas of challenge. What I'm going to propose is that we take limited assurance today, because actually I think it would be difficult to argue it either way. And what I'm going to suggest is that going forward, we take a slightly different approach to this. I think trying to give one assurance level to this is maybe not the right thing. We're trying to with a very broad brush, kind of pin down something that literally encompasses our whole organization, our whole operation. So I would suggest we mark it as limited today, but we take this offline and we really think about how we do this going forward, because I actually don't think that trying to give one level of assurance to this very rich report is possible, yet alone appropriate. But I'm happy to pause there, happy to take any alternative views, or people give me thumbs up, whatever feels right. Okay. Right, let's do that today then, and then we will go away and have a real think about how we record that assurance going forwards. Okay, thanks everybody. Right, we've really earned our break this morning. We're a little bit behind schedule, but that's fine. Let's take 10 minutes and I'll see you all back here at 11:25.